All right, let us see. Can we see attendees? I can't see the Q&A box. I can see that.
I'll look at participants.
I see 4 participants.
We have one attendee.
We'll give folks time to come in. So people are coming in to the room and we'll give a little bit more time before we start. Um, I see that Alec has the slideshow up, but we're not ready to present just yet.
Yeah. Kind of trying to get it back to where it was. Well, maybe that's just going to be what it is. Oh, Caitlin is looking for the Zoom info, so somebody can.
I'll send it to her.
Okay.
Oh, here she is. Alec, let me know when you're ready to present. And we'll go ahead and start because if we don't have that many attendees, then this will still be recorded for people to use later.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm sorry, I didn't have the Zoom.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, and I'm ready to share again. How's that look? Good? Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the National Performance Network 2021 Southern Artists for Social Change information webinar for the Letter of Intent. Social Artists for Social Change is a project-based grant intended for BIPOC artists and cultural bearers engaging in civic and social practice. In this webinar, we aim to give more insight and information about the initiative itself, as well as the LOI process. I hope that you find this information useful in filling out your application. Next slide. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the occupied land in which NPN is located, Bubancha, land of many tongues, the ancestral lands of the Ishak, Caddo, Chitimacha, Choctaw, Homa, Natchez, and Tunica peoples, as well as the Petite Nations. We also recognize the Alabama, Biloxi, Quasata, and Ofo peoples, and others who were pushed from their ancestral lands into Louisiana. We aim to honor these communities past, present, and future. We would also like to recognize the many enslaved and indentured people who were forced into labor to build and construct what we now call New Orleans through terrorism, blood, sweat, and tears. These entwined legacies of continued occupation and anti-Blackness persist today, but we will continue to work towards liberation, equity, community, and justice. Next slide. My name is Stephanie Clemens, and I'm the program coordinator for NPN Southern Regranting Initiatives. I go by the pronouns she and hers. I also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for you to view on NPN's website and social media pages. Closed captioning has also been enabled, so you can follow along via transcription if you need to. During this presentation, please enter your questions in the Q&A box located below. You can submit questions as they arise, and we'll try our best to answer as many of them as we are able to during the presentation. But towards the end of our time together, we'll have a dedicated session to review all the previous questions and to answer any further ones that you may have. We will also be sharing relevant links into the chat box as we go along. So please notice where your chat box is. That's where we will share relevant links, and the Q&A is where you will put your questions. Next slide. So today we'll be going over a little bit about Southern Artists for Social Change, a walkthrough of the LOI application itself, and introduce you to Smart Simple, our new application program. We'll also touch and go over the timeline and process, and like I said, the question and answer session. Next slide. Now I'm going to introduce you to Caitlin Strokash, our Executive Director of the National Performance Network, who will share more about Southern Artists for Social Change, as well as NPN's ethos and mission. Caitlin?
Thanks for being with us here. This is the second round of Southern Artists for Social Change that we're about to launch. And I want to just provide a little bit of context of NPN overall. The National Performance Network was founded in 1985 in New York City as a program of the Dance Theater Workshop. And the original mission was to provide greater support for artists in the performing arts and for their mobility across the country. And that mission quickly expanded to look at the issues of artist equity, particularly artists of color and artists in other geographic regions outside of the major metro centers of places like New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. When NPN relocated to New Orleans in 2001, it was a real opportunity to think about our local presence and not just what it meant to be a national service organization, but one that had a commitment to our local community here in New Orleans and in the our mission changed over time. We included more organizations around the country. We focused more on supporting artists of color, including organizations of color in our network. And more specifically, in the last few years, we've really expanded the depth and the breadth of our local programs in New Orleans and the Deep South. Our mission today is to contribute to a more just and equitable world by building artist power, advancing racial and cultural justice in the arts, working toward relationships and reciprocity between individuals, institutions, and communities, and advancing systems change in arts and philanthropy. The work that we do here locally is touching on all of those things. This program in particular, which Stephanie Atkins will talk more about, is thinking a lot about how we build artist power and at the intersection of advancing racial justice in our communities. It's also about systems change and philanthropy in challenging ourselves to think about what it looks like to more fully resource artists, particularly in a region with very few financial resources and grants for artists, what it means to put artists at the center of the process, as opposed to organizations or other kinds of structures that often hold the purse strings for artist projects. And how do we really invest deeply in the work that's happening in communities in ways that expresses our commitment to relationships and reciprocity. So we're really excited to have this program within National Performance Network's entire body of programming that we do nationally, regionally, and locally. And I would like to introduce the Director of Local Programs, Stephanie Atkins, to talk more specifically about Southern Artists for Social Change.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hello, my name is Stephanie Atkins. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Local Programs. This grant is under my stewardship. And I'm really excited that this program is in its second year. And I'm excited to be introduced to other artists working with community and learning about their inspiring projects. So I'm going to talk first about the goals and intentions of Southern Artists for Social Change. Southern Artists for Social Change intends to build a world in which BIPOC people living, working, and organizing for community change in the South have power and the resources they need and opportunities to thrive. As Caitlin mentioned earlier, NPN's mission is to contribute to a more just and equitable world by building artist power, advancing racial and cultural justice in the arts, fostering relationships between individuals, institutions, and communities, and working towards system change in arts and philanthropy. NPN's goals is to get money into the hands of artists. Southern Artists for Social Change provides $25,000 project grants to artists and cultural bearers of color, living, working, and engaging in social change in urban, rural, and tribal communities of Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. This program awarded its first round of grants in 2020, and this is the second cycle. What is civic practice or community-based art? NPN and the Certain Foundation use the Center for Performance and Civic Practice definition of civic practice, which states work that brings artists into collaboration and co-design with community partners and residents around a community-defined vision. We use another definition from our peers at Alternate Roots, who define community-based art for social change as creative expression that emerges from communities of people working together to improve their individual and collective circumstance. So the key words to remember are collaboration, co-design, and emerges from communities. Next slide, defining communities. How do we define communities? Again, from our colleagues at Alternate Roots, we define communities as groups of people who share a geography, historical, or ethnic tradition, and a belief or spirit. NPN Southern Artists for Social Change program supports projects that take a community-centered approach that includes authentic partnership between artists and community members, and in which those closest to a community's challenges have the power to make change. We ask applicants to define the specific community they are engaging, the relationship to that community, and other community members' role in the project. Next slide. Who are cultural bearers? We define cultural bearer as a community member who practices that community's artistic or creative expression. Oftentimes, knowledge of these arts and skills is passed from person to person within a cultural group, and that the art itself expresses the community's values and aesthetics. Next slide. Eligibility. So who's eligible? Artists and cultural bearers who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are living, working, and engaging in social change in Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Individual artists, as well as artist collectives, may apply. If you're with an artist collective, you must have a demonstrated history of creating new work collectively for at least 2 years. So if this is going to be your first project as an artist collective, then unfortunately you're not eligible for this grant because we are going to ask for documentation. Who else is eligible? Applicants must be 18 years or older by the application deadline. Applicants must be residents of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana for at least 5 years at the time of both the application and the payment, the grant payment. And you must provide a valid state ID. Also, projects should identify a community challenge or need. They also must imagine a different future. And they must also demonstrate a practice, design, or a design for approaches towards that future that centers racial justice. And while the project may be artist-driven, projects should also include at least 2 community members that can be individuals, agencies, or organizations. So these community members must be collaborators who share decision-making and shaping the project and the project outcomes. Next, we're going to talk about who's not eligible at this time. Next slide. So unfortunately, at this time, we cannot support nonprofit organizations as the lead applicant. And if you're a recent 2020 NPN Creation Fund recipient, unfortunately, you're not eligible for this opportunity. Also, artists who are high school students or who are college or graduate students currently enrolled in degree programs at the time of the application or during the grant period aren't eligible. Current NPN staff, board members, and panelists are ineligible. And also curators and researchers are ineligible. Next slide. How can the funds be used? Grants may support any phase of a project. Okay, so it can support research, it can support development, and it can support production. It can include new initiatives. It can also include ongoing work. And remember, a portion of the funding should directly support artists. And now I'm going to kick it over to Stephanie Clemens.
Thank you, Steph. Give me 1 second. I'm going to turn my camera back on. Right now, I'm going to share the link to the guidelines so that you can follow along with me. This next section will be about the application process. Let's see. Stephanie, I think you have the spotlight on. I can't see. That's fine. You only need to really hear my voice on this section. Next slide, Alec. At this time, I'm going to go over the application content. Like I said, I linked the guidelines document so that you can have them to refer to. I want to say with this LOI, you are not being evaluated on your writing style, grammar, or complete phrasing. Brief answers are welcome and respond in any way that you are comfortable. If you need technical assistance, please contact me, Stephanie Clemens, and I will share my email at the end of this slide. Next slide. Demographics. NPN is required to collect certain demographic data about artist recipients of grant funds to understand how our support aligns with the diversity of the arts sector. We recognize that some of this data may seem personal, but we ask that you respond to the best of your ability per the requests of our funders. We also acknowledge that the terminology we use is imperfect and constantly evolving, and we actively strive to update our demographic terminology as new information becomes available. Some questions you should expect in this section: your preferred name, race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability access, age, and geographic information, among others. If you're applying as a collective, we will ask for the total number of people in your collective for these categories. For example, we will ask you for the total number of members in the collective who identify as BIPOC, and so on. Next slide. After you have completed the demographic section of the application, you have the option to respond to the subsequent sections via video. This is an option. If you feel more comfortable responding to the prompts verbally, if you decide to respond to the prompts verbally. If you choose this option, please record your responses to the questions via YouTube or Vimeo and insert the link to the corresponding box. Please make sure if you're using Vimeo or YouTube that a password has been shared and the files are not private so that we can view them and the panelists as well. Also, at the beginning of your video, state the question you're responding to at the very beginning. Remember, this is just an option. You can respond to the questions by filling out the application, and this is only about your preference. One does not advantage the other. The next section is the artistic information section. We will ask for your biography, and this is also where you will state your discipline or multiple disciplines that captures your practice, and where you will provide a brief statement based on that selection. Next slide. Tell us briefly about your story as an artist or cultural bearer. This is the biography question. You can provide details about yourself and your work, such as where you were born or where you grew up. Keep your bio simple and concise, no more than a short paragraph. If your project is awarded, we will use this summary to promote your project. Next slide. In this slide, you'll see the list of eligible disciplines. They have a lot of range. If you don't see your discipline on here and you still would like to apply, please contact me and let's discuss how you may fit in this. How you may fit in these disciplines, or if there's something that we need to expand on our own side. You can choose as many as you find representative of your practice. So if you're a multidisciplinary artist, then choose all the ones that apply to you. Next slide. The discipline statement. Based on your previous selections, this statement is a description of your work in your own words. It can be as simple as, I'm a new music composer, or give a more detailed explanation of your practice. For example, I am a new music composer creating atmospheric sounds influenced by blues and gospel that speak to the landscape of the rural South. You can be as specific as you want, or you can stick to a brief and concise statement. Next slide. Civic practice statement. Describe how your practice engages the community. Feel free to describe methods and strategies you use to organize social change through your work. For example, why is it important to be a civic-minded artist? How did you come to this work, or has it been a part of your practice all along? This answer should demonstrate your commitment and interest to social practice and how you use your art in that work. If this is your first time in civic engagement work, talk about your hopes in this expanded role and what you wish to investigate with your work and your artistry, methods and tools that you would like to explore through social engagement practice. So if you do not have experience in civic practice and you still would like to apply, consider those as some options for this question. Next slide. Project information. This next section is about the project itself, your goals, communities, planned outcomes surrounding the project. We'll be going over in this section a brief description of the project, your community challenge, imagining new and just futures, and how your work will build towards this future, and advancing racial justice. Next slide. On the slideshow right now, we have 2 examples that you can also follow along in the guidelines document to use. Absorb these examples, but also know that you're not limited to them. So what we are looking for is a concise statement that generally shows what you plan on doing. So take a look at these samples, and I'm going to give you one more. Your sample, your description should describe your initiative and give a general gist of your process. An example that I'm going to share with you on my own today is if I were imagining a reentry program, I would say something like, as new policies and administrations begin to reform the criminal justice system, releasing many incarcerated people, my initiative aims to build economic power to the formerly incarcerated by providing a craft residency program that will use art making as a therapy while providing skills that will make people economically dependent. So you really want to get to who the project is centered on, why this project is important, and a brief statement of the outcomes you hope to achieve. Next slide. Community challenge. What specific community challenge does your project address? Tell us about your challenge that project aims to highlight and then change. Describe the challenge, its relationship to the community affected, and the importance to disrupt it. We have 2 examples listed for you right now on the presentation. But going off of my reentry example, I might say something like, Black people comprise 33% of Louisiana's state population, but make up 67% of the prison populace. Oftentimes, formerly incarcerated people are not given their fair chance in the workforce and are dependent on low-wage jobs. Building economic freedom for formerly incarcerated people will add to the craft fair ecosystem, which prioritizes white makers. So right there, I've stated my challenge. I'm tackling mass incarceration, also economic dependence and racially economic injustice, and also challenging a white space. So that is what my challenges are. You may have one, you may have many, but it's important not to just gloss over this question and really attack that community challenge right up front. Next slide. Imagining a new and just future. Imagine what your community would look like without this challenge. Don't shy away from this question and really delve into what your community could be. Using my example, I would say, what would my future be? I would want more Black vendors at makers markets and craft fairs while providing economic freedom for formerly incarcerated people, which will decrease recidivism and create a supportive framework for welcoming people back in their community. A future where spaces and fairs are filled with more Black vendors where folks could shop locally and spend money on art that speaks to their values and support, their values of support, as well as their own aesthetics. Next slide. Working towards and building new futures. How does your project work towards this new future? Feel free to describe strategies, models, and tools that you will use to build your future. How will you do this work? For example, I would say, using my same example, I would want to provide safe and comfortable artistic space where a cohort of formerly incarcerated community members can express themselves in different mediums, such as painting, photography, etc., to develop or expand craft skills, while also providing professional development in marketing, branding, and paying for their membership fees, supplies, eliminating prohibitive costs. So the previous question basically asked me, what do you want to see? And I said, economic liberation for formerly incarcerated folks from a limited workforce and more Black vendors at Makers Market, right? This question is saying, how are you going to get it? How are you going to do it? And I said, by providing space, paying fees, and providing professional development. Therefore, ending that cycle. So look at both the previous question and this question together. Make sure that they reconcile each other so that you don't lose your framework in building your project. Next slide. Advancing racial justice. We're going to ask you, how does your project advance racial justice? What is listed are some suggestions to just kind of help you get your juices flowing, so to say, and spark some ideas. Feel free to describe in your own words and terms, but try to be as specific as you can. The community that I'm using in my example is Black and formerly incarcerated. So through my project, I'm advancing racial justice through the intersections of mass incarceration and economic justice for Black people. Next slide. Community partnerships. This is the meat of this application. So while your projects are artistic driven and you may be the one applying for this grant on your own, projects should include at least 2 community partners, and they can be individuals, agencies, or organizations. But they have to be in a collaborative role and sharing the decision-making and shaping of the project and its outcomes. So in this section, we're gonna ask you to identify your community, talk a little bit more about your community partners and why you chose them, and share and how you are sharing in this process, the decision-making and how this project is really gonna roll out. Next slide. Which community does this project center, and how would you define or describe that community is the next question in this section. So be as specific as you can. Is this a multi-generational community? Is this community linked by geographic area? Describe just the commonalities that make this a community, whether they're social, cultural, or ethnic. So that's what this question is really about. Next slide. Community partners. Which community partners are involved with the project and what are their roles? Are these partners part of an ongoing network of support already in place? Like I stated already, community partners can be individuals, organizations, or agencies, or a mix of all of those things. If I'm working in foodways and my community partners could be Black chefs, community garden, and an organization that gives people land to explore agriculture. So that's a mix of 3 different bodies that's going to help support this work and also share in the outcomes. How do these community partnerships advance racial justice? So in this question, you would talk a little bit more about the racial justice work that each community partner does and the mission and alignment that you share with them. What led you to partner with them? Are these community partners BIPOC led or centered, or a combination of both? The next question is, what is your relationship to these community partners? And is there a history of collaboration between you and them? So this is more about sharing more about your understanding of what they do in their community and how you're going to work with them. If you haven't worked with your community partner and this will be your first project, it's fine to state that. You won't be eliminated or anything for that. This is just getting an understanding of where you are with these community partners. Next slide. Decision-making. How are vision and decision-making of the project shared among the partners? Describe how you will work with the partners and how you will steward a process that will ensure community partners have equitable buy-in in the project and its outcomes. Some examples that people in this cohort, in this current cohort are using are weekly and monthly calls as the project develops, sharing updates, doing community work, not just for an outcome, but throughout the process. The first way that you could collaborate with your community partners is by filling out this application if you're able to. So this is just making sure that there's an equitable and reciprocal relationship between you and these community partners, and that you're not just finding people to apply for this grant. Next slide. This next section is the final section in this part of the LOI, and this will be your collateral and supplementary materials. So the first thing that we're going to ask you for is an artistic photo with photo credit of the person who took the photo and an image description for sight readers. So this is a photo that if you are awarded, we will use this on our website and other communications after asking your permission, of course, but just so that we have these on file. And so that the panelists can get a look of you, and just a headshot will do as well. But if you're working in a collective, it would be nice to show the collective members in this photo. For the image description for sight readers, what we really are looking for is just to be able to describe what folks would see in this photo. So a placement of objects, colors, your name, if you're the artist, emotions such as smiling, surroundings if they're important or ground the photo. So if I had a photo of me and it was a headshot, I would say the artist, Stephanie Clemens, centered in the photo with a white background. Stephanie is holding a ceramic pot while smiling at the camera, wearing a shirt that says Black Ceramicist. So this is so that we can communicate with everyone. The next slide. Work samples. You can submit samples that show your larger practice or something specific to your civic practice. You can also include photos of your communities for this project that you are currently, if you've already have some photos and work samples, because it's a project that's ongoing, you can submit some of those too. It's really up to you. Next slide. Uploads and work samples. This is really getting into what you are able to upload. And the magic number is 10. So if you want to submit visual art samples, you have 10 images. Performing arts, video, and audio, you have 10 minutes total. Manuscripts, 10 pages. So if you wanted to do a combination and you're a multidisciplinary artist and you wanted to submit 2 performing arts samples, 5 minutes each, that's your 10. If you wanted to do 3 images, I'm not good at math, so let me see, 3 images, visual art images, and 3 minutes of audio and video, and then like whatever else is left, written manuscript. As long as it equals to 10, that's what you're allowed. So each of those kind of 1 minute for each, 10 minutes, but 1 minute is equal to one of these other sections. If you don't get it, it's really not that complicated, but if you have questions, please email me and I'm happy to go over your uploads before you submit them. Next slide. In addition to your 10 uploads, you will also be submitting a work sample description or a synopsis sheet. This is just a complementary document to map and describe what your samples that you've uploaded. This is so that we can show the panelists or read for ourselves, like one is a visual arts image that was made in 1992 or whenever, and a description of what's happening with that, and so forth and so on. So this is just very basic. You don't really have to go into a lot of detail. This is just, like I said, a complementary document that goes alongside your 10 uploads. Next slide. Criteria for selection. We hope that this next section will provide some useful information for you to evaluate your application before you hit send. So let's move on to the next slide. Here are all of those questions in the way, the criteria that you will be evaluated against. So if you're working and you've come to the end of your application and you're questioning, did I meet those goals? Look at this criterion selection that's located in the guidelines and ask yourself these questions. It's good to also share this application with someone you feel comfortable with receiving feedback, and ask them to give you feedback using this criterion selection section as a metric. You can also, at any time, if you have a question about your application, contact me for technical assistance, and we can talk through a lot of these questions that you have and how it looks in your application. Next section. Tips and hints. Again, if you were preferred to respond to the narrative question in video format, really make sure that it's tight, and that, like I said, you also state at the beginning what question you're responding to. You don't have to have a dramatic entrance or outro. Just really get to that question if you're responding to the narrative question. Save the other things for your uploads. Using SoundCloud, YouTube, and Vimeo, make sure that they're not password protected. If they are, share that alongside. You can share that in your workload document, synopsis document, so that we can have access to those things. I would also utilize word processing software like Google Docs to answer these questions, and it's also an opportunity to collaborate with your collective or community members, and then copy and paste those into the Smart Simple application. As you work in Smart Simple, which Alec is about to go over, make sure that you save and anytime you make a change, so that your information will be there if you decide to leave and come back to it. Again, have someone you trust to proofread your application and give you feedback on your uploads and your application itself. That would, be community partners. And if you haven't already, by now, this would be a good time to start talking with community partners and telling them about your intentions to apply for this project and how you would like for them to be included. So this is actually the first step in that relationship. If you haven't built it, it's by getting your community partners to help you with this application submission. If you find yourself getting stuck with your application at the beginning, one writing exercise that I propose to people to just get folks thinking about this application outside of the grant speak is to ask yourself, what do you want to do? Why is it important to you? Who are you doing it with and why? And what would be the ultimate goal and outcome for you in this work? So use this as just an exercise to start writing and just free flow those ideas and answer those questions, and use that to begin to shape how you are going to answer some of these other questions. I want to say, I know that was a lot of information, but if you have any questions, I'm available to work with you with your application and any other support that you may need. Please contact me. I'll be sharing my information towards the end of this program. It's also in the guidelines and the website. And right now I'm going to hand it over to Alec so he can go over our new application software, Smart Simple. Alec?
Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Alec DeLeon. I use he and him pronouns. I am one of the program specialists at the National Performance Network that is based in New Orleans. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the application platform, which is a thing called Smart Simple. It's an online platform. What you see in blue on our screen is the link for the application. So when you're ready to apply, you can go ahead and enter that into your web browser. And of course, the link is mentioned in the guidelines, so you can look to there to enter it. So what you'll need to do, this is a screenshot of what the opening page on our Smart Simple system looks like. You'll need to set up an account through Smart Simple. Now, if you already have an account through our grant management system, maybe you've applied for something else in the past, you can just go ahead and enter your email and password. If you forgot your password because you set it up a few months ago, you can click on the forgot password here, denoted with the red arrow, to reset your password. Or if you're new to the system, you can go ahead and click the little blue register button at the bottom. So once you hit the blue register button, you'll have three choices as how to register. For your purposes, since you'll be applying as artists, you will want to select either the individual artist option or the collaboration of multiple artists. And this is, of course, if you are working with other artist collaborators, just in a nutshell. And once you select one of those options, you will, of course, have to fill out all the pertinent information regarding you. You'll see that we do ask for legal first name and last name, but we definitely recognize that sometimes folks don't necessarily associate themselves fully with that. So we do welcome you to enter in your preferred full name. For instance, my full legal name is Alejandro, but I often go by Alec. So I would probably put Alec DeLeon in there instead of Alejandro DeLeon, but it's up to you, of course. And if you are applying as a collaboration of artists, you will also be asked to fill out organizational information. So what's the name of your group or your organization, and all things like that. There's a good bit of other information, including your address and all that that you'll be asked to fill out, but you'll see that when you get the process started. Once you set up your account, you will log into the Smart Simple system. And this is your kind of your dashboard, your grantee home is what it's called in the system. And so you can see you got your name mentioned up at the top, a link that you can adjust your profile and add your address or edit things as necessary. Of course, also changing your password. In order to start the application, you will go to the funding opportunities section here and click on that. It'll turn blue. Okay. Then it'll bring you to a couple of different funding opportunities that are open right now through our NPN programs. And so you'll look for, of course, the Southern Artists for Social Change. To start the application, you just click on Apply Now. If you want to download the program guidelines, you can just click the program guidelines button and it will download a PDF directly to your computer. So when you get the application started, you will find a few different things in here. The application is set up in a series of tabs that you can see here with the little tabs arrow. To navigate from this one to the artist collective information, you can use these little arrows at the bottom that say next or back, okay? And really an important thing that you'll always want to do is save your draft frequently. So maybe you've entered a lot of text into the narrative field, or maybe you've uploaded some images or your work sample sheet. Make sure you save the draft in between all of those things, because if there's a glitch in the system or the internet goes down, those changes may not be saved. Again, from the application, you can download the guidelines if you need a refresher on them, or at any point, you can go ahead and click on the LOI summary button, and it will download a PDF of your application as it exists. So you can get it, have a draft if you want to send it off to your colleagues to review before you submit it. You can do that, and etc. When you are ready to submit, you go ahead and hit the submit button. And just to let you know, you can keep the draft active as long as you want, up until the deadline, of course. So if you start it tomorrow, you can get a look at the questions and see how you might want to answer it. And then you can just save the draft, close it out, and return to it tomorrow, the next day, or the next day. But when you do hit the submit button, the required questions will go ahead and give you a little red X button here that shows that you haven't answered that question. So take a look at those, and you can scroll through the different tabs to find out what you might be missing, if anything. Now, once you have submitted, once you're in your dashboard and you've started a draft application, you'll see that you can access it by clicking on the draft applications button. Once you submit your application, it'll go ahead and change this 0 to a 1. And when it is approved, hopefully, it will change that to a number 1 as well. And that's pretty much what I had to cover. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the application. So back to Stephanie Atkins.
Thanks, Alec, for that information. Right now, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So if you do have questions, please pop them in to the, I'm sorry, you guys. I'm sorry, y'all. We are now at the timeline and process, and let me pop back out of here. Stephanie Atkins, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, I'm ready, bud.
Do I need to go to the next slide, Stephanie? Or
No, this is good. I was
okay.
just to see. I was just making sure that I was on the screen.
Okay.
But I'm ready. So yes, let's talk about timeline and process. So the timeline, the portal, the grant portal is open. Okay, so if you could have gone on earlier today or even after this webinar, you can go, like Alex mentioned, you can actually go and start the application process. And the open call for the letter of intent will be open until July 30th. And it closes at 11:59 Central Time Zone. Okay, so you have all day on July 30th to get your application in, but at 11:59, it's going to close. So just be mindful of that, and I encourage folks not to wait till the last minute. Okay. Then those who are invited to submit a full proposal will receive notification on August the 23rd. And then the full proposal application will be due on Friday, August the 27th. We're going to have a final panel review on September the 21st. And then we're going to announce awards by the end of September, by September 30th, okay? And then we're hoping, we're going to announce it to the awardees. It won't be a public announcement. We'll notify, I'm sorry, let me change my words. We're going to notify the awardees. And then we're going to have a public announcement of the grantees on November 1st. Next slide. Well, before we get to Q&A, before we open up to Q&A, I also want to share the process as far as like the composition of the panel. The review panel is made up of representatives from each state, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And we've invited practitioners and art administrators in the arts field to be the folks who are going to review the application and select which projects are awarded. So now we're going to open it up for our question and answer period. And again, you can enter your questions into the chat box, or you can enter your questions into the Q&A box. We don't have a lot of attendees, but we have 3 that we are eager to answer if you have any questions and give you our full attention.
It looks like we don't have any questions and answers at this moment. Well, let's see. So the invitations, this is from attendees. So the invitations for the full proposal will come on August 23rd. And then that full proposal is due on August 27th.
I can take that, yes. Yes, so the first stage of this opportunity for Southern Artists for Social Change is a letter of intent. And then, so we have 2 stages. And then the second stage, applicants are invited to submit a full proposal. And yes, it's basically 4 or 5 days, but you're really building on the letter of intent. It's not like you have to write a completely new proposal application. Basically, during the first stage, when your LOI is reviewed, there may be some clarifying questions that we get from the panelists that will reach back out to you and ask you to maybe elaborate or answer a question.
And to also like further answer that question, some of the extra materials in the full proposal round will be getting those community partners to verify that they're working with you and to get their demographics, and that will be an online application process itself as well. So this webinar is for the LOI, but yes, there are a few more components for the full proposal that we haven't covered in this webinar. And that will be timeline, budget, and all of those other things once you make it to that round. Thank you.
And also, I would just like to say that, again, like Stephanie Clemens has shared, you know, please feel free to contact us. Stephanie Clemens' information is at the end of this slide presentation, and we're going to share that. And also, I will put my email in the chat box. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. Stephanie Clemens is the program coordinator. So she is more knowledgeable of the process and has worked with the previous applicants before. And, just being mindful of the number of days between notifying an applicant that they have been invited to submit a full proposal to the date when everything is due. NPN, we're very intentional about making this process as easy as possible. So even though it's just a few days, don't think of it as something that's extremely labor intense. And like I said, you're just going to really have to build on what it is that you've already shared with us.
Are there any more questions? This is another question. Okay, great, thank you. So the budget and timeline will have 4 days to be finalized. Can we have a preview for the extra contact that will be asked for ahead of time so that we can have more time to really get things organized in a good way? Content, not contact. So right now, what we're going over, we're gonna stick with the LOI process. If you reach out to me, I'm happy to share a sample of a timeline and a budget and what that will look like. And that could be helpful for a range of things. Um, and so the other content is just like Stephanie Atkins said, expanding upon the stuff that you've already submitted in the narrative that you've already worked on for your LOI. The full proposal round has a whole different guidelines and a whole different step that we're not covering today. But please reach out and I'm happy to share a timeline, a budget, and some of those things. Like I said, your community partners will be asked the same demographics as you and will be asked to submit statements of support as well. Was that helpful? You're welcome. Any other questions? Awesome. All right, well, we are right at 5:31. And so can we go to the next slide, please? We want to thank the Certain Foundation for their support in this work. MPN, Southern Artists for Social Change, is a part of Certain Foundation's Radical Imagination for Radical Justice initiative, which supports civic practice projects that bring artists of color into collaboration and co-design with their partners and local residents of colors around a community-defined vision. So we really want to thank Certain Foundation for their support and for helping shape this initiative. Next slide. As we leave today, I just want to leave you my contact information for technical support. Stephanie Atkins, the program director, you can also find her information. We'll put all of that. It's all on the website, but it's also in the guidelines document. So please reach out way ahead of the deadline if you have any questions, and don't hesitate to contact us. Nick Huster isn't here with us, but he will be your point person for Smart Simple. So if you have any questions about the Smart Simple application software, if it's giving you problems, then please contact Nick for those to answer those questions. If you don't find that you're getting responses in a timely manner, then please reach out to me as well, or Alec, who's also on this call. We're all here to help you and guide you through this process. And I want to thank you for sharing your time with us today, the participants that are here, and also the participants in the future who are going to be watching this webinar. Best of luck to everyone. Please celebrate yourselves in this work if you've made it this far. And thank you for spending your time with us today.